All right, everyone, welcome back to another special report with Monty, who is the founder and author of the Peach Pit Substack. He's back once again with his amazing track record to go over some research on the automotive industry. But we're going to do something a little bit different. You do not want to focus on the major providers or manufacturers, rather, GM or Ford. Today, we're going to talk about the peripherals. And I think it's a great way to kind of tackle this industry to kind of get a gear of where it's likely headed. So Monty, why don't you kick us off? What are we going to be focused on today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. And a lot of what derives from a lot shit, I just fucked it up completely. We're gonna cut that out.
That's fine.
All right, action. So thank you, Josh. And a lot of what I've been focusing on is the automotive parts manufacturers, the guys that create the components that they sell to for GM, the OEMs, the aftermarket parts, guys like that, who makes the individual components that actually go into the vehicle instead of selling the vehicles themselves. And one of my big investment theses or trade ideas, whichever you want to call it, was encompassing the company American Axle. They do the drivetrains for many of these medium duty trucks, for Ram, the F 150, for GM, for a lot of these guys. And what I found is that, kind of pulling some data from the various automotive manufacturers and insinuating some operation costs or constraints, however you want to put it. These guys are going to get hit pretty hard if this strike continues to persist. And the rationale behind it is that unlike a lot of the other parts manufacturers, American Axle does not have an aftermarket segment in which they only sell parts to the manufacturers instead of, to, let's say, body shops for upgrades and modifications and things of that sort. So it's pure sales to these manufacturers. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is, the strikes still persist. There are tentative agreements in place with Ford, GM, and Stellantis now, but those are just tentative. They're still awaiting approval, and the repercussions of, these cost constraints that will come into play. What was it, like a 23% salary increase for the union workers or something of that sort?
It's close to that.
Something like that. So, um, kind of funneling that down into the various costs. How is this going to affect parts manufacturers, and will it have any effect at all? Will it make them think twice on, hey, these guys are getting paid more? Let's have our own little strike and see if we can get a couple more bucks out of this. So, there's a lot of thought that goes into this. What's going to be the end result? Are cars going to be more expensive? Are just manufacturing them going to be more expensive as demand rolls off? Are car sales going to keep up at the higher prices? I mean, they're already up what percentage since pre-pandemic levels? I mean, the cost of buying a new car is just outstanding. And I mean, let alone a used vehicle, but for new vehicles, what's the average these days? It was up something like 30, 40,000 now or something like that. It's just climbed and climbed over the last few years. And, it may not necessarily be putting a constraint on the consumer, but, the monthly costs, monthly premiums, in addition to higher interest rates to the cost of financing, it's just continuing to climb. And, as a consumer, can they keep up with the payments, or what are going to be the overall implications there? Are there going to be less vehicle sales? What's going to end up happening as a result of all this? So, diving into a little bit about American Axle. So there's limited data on, the various automotive manufacturers and how they funnel into American Axle. We know the percentage of business that each of them do with each other, but we don't know exactly what percentage of that business can be contributed to the different facilities. let alone the different vehicles that they're manufacturing components for each of these manufacturers. So, it's a very high level thesis, high level rationale, and I had to do a little bit of cross pollination from GM and Ford, given that GM reported the implications of the strike so far going into the third quarter earnings. They had a figure of something like $200 million in EBIT, have been the effects of the UAW strike that was on the reporting day. They anticipate something closer to 700 million when the strike is all said and done. And that's EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, or operating income. So, that's about a 30% change on their operations as a result of this UAW strike. So translating that over to American Axle, using that 30% as a baseline for GM and trickling that down to Ford. Stellantis, I believe they gave a more finite figure on their Ram trucks that American Axle produces parts for. I believe, if my memory serves me well, it was closer to 27% for the specific facilities that had been under strike or labor restrictions. So, coming down to it, funneling each of these figures into their respective percentages of GM, Stellantis, and Ford, it will have a top line effect of about 6% for the fourth quarter. And it's going to have even further challenges on their operating margins from there on. So I put a hard sell on American Axle with a price target of around $4, down from somewhere in the $7 range. So that's what is that, like a 30% return if the trade were successful? So again, this is a highly speculative trade. A lot of these figures are not finite figures, they're not firm figures. It's more so me insinuating that Ford is going to have a similar effect to GM as a result of these UAW strikes. Now, if the strikes were to clear up, which, what week are we into? Like 8, maybe 9 now?
I think
The
that's right.
strike.
Yeah. It's one of the longest at this point, if not the longest.
And that's not to say that, again, these deals are tentative. They're not in place. They have not been approved by the members yet. So they may just, go full Leroy Jenkins and say, no, we're not taking the deal, keep going, and shut down essentially a major component of the US economy. So this could be either a quick fix, it's all done, said and done in the next couple of weeks, or it could persist into the end of the year and have even further disastrous effects on our economy.
At,
And
at
mhm,
what at what point of these strikes do you start to get concerned about the like a bankruptcy, given also the macro and the recession, and it is, by the way, the longest strike they've ever had. GM in the past proven not to be, the most fiscally responsible. They've gone bankruptcy before. Ford and Tesla, the only two that never have. At what point do you think that needs to be given some consideration?
that's a tough question, and that's not necessarily one I have an answer to.
Yeah.
But if it were to persist, let's say through the end of the year, maybe trickling into first half of 24, I think that's when we should be getting more concerned. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, it's not a full blown strike per se. It's more of an intermittent strike where they have set days where they have a labor stoppage. They're not completely just cutting off their services to these firms. So there's
Yeah.
still vehicle production. It's just at a slower rate. And that kind
Right.
of that raised a big question for me. And I talked to Josh about this in private a week or two ago, but me being the armchair conspiracy theorist, this did raise a couple questions for me on who's really driving the strike. You see, a lot of people, a lot of economists, a lot of analysts have been expecting a huge US recession for the last year going into 2024. And with the recession, people aren't necessarily buying vehicles. We're seeing more late payments on vehicles coming through. We're seeing higher costs on vehicles, maybe a slowdown on purchases of new vehicles. I don't know about you, but I did a big drive down to Texas from my home up here in St. Louis about a month or two ago. And as I was passing by those dealership lots, man, I saw a ton of Silverados, a ton of F-150s just
Hmm.
lined up on the lots. Maybe that was just the supply, knowing that there's a lot of people that buy trucks down there. Maybe it was just nobody's buying them. They're vacant on the lot and they're not being pushed. So, it did raise a lot of questions with the understanding that we're supposed to have lower inventory on these dealership lots. So, it's definitely something worth questioning. But my point being is that maybe these dealers, or not the dealers, but maybe these automotive manufacturers, GM, Ford, Stellantis, they see the writing on the wall. We're going into recession, but they don't want to raise concerns that they might be more heavily affected than we expect. So maybe they did a coordination with UAW, and that led to this intermittent work stoppage that led to lower volumes of vehicles being produced without any concern about GM, Ford, or Stellantis' operation efficiencies, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
So the end goal. Okay. So can you try to like paraphrase that down? So the end goal would be that they are
so
having issues and they're going to hide it by having the unions go on strike.
exactly. So
Yeah.
there are, so the whole thesis on manufacturers is that post COVID, we're going to get back up to pre COVID levels of vehicle manufacturing. And that'll be what drives the US out of this recession. Though my thoughts are this doesn't necessarily play out because we have such a huge inflation rate. We have so much pressure on the consumer as far as, cost of living concerns go. We have more of our income being put onto credit. And I think we had this discussion to where what was that? What did you mention about credit? The average level of credit to personal income, it's actually lower than it
Yeah,
had been,
so
or
on the weekly report I just published, I went through I took the graphs showing the all-time high credit card debt for the US consumer, just cleared over 1 trillion. But then I wanted to normalize that data by incorporating inflation and then wage inflation. So I used consumer disposable income, and then you basically divide that by the credit, the the 1 trillion in credit card debt. And when you normalize that chart, it actually shows, and then look over it over the period of time, 5 years or 10 years, 15 years, you start to realize that credit card debt is actually still historically low. It is climbing, but it is still historically low. So, and what I included on that weekly report is it reminds me a lot of our conversation with Jonah Lupton, him saying stronger for longer, because there's definitely still plenty of warning signs. And then, the economic data that we've been getting recently, GDP number came in fine, but once again, getting revised lower. Most of the economic data points we got this past week were all misses. And then you're also hearing retailers talk about decline in consumer demand, Target especially. So I think there's still tons of warning signs. So, even in this moment, it seems like it's not as bad as some of the bear porn purports. um, it still looks pretty rough.
yeah. So what you're saying is I need to change my negative outlook to a slightly negative outlook instead of an extremely negative outlook, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Well, I mean,
But
it could change rapidly though. That's the way this stuff goes, right?
you
Something
don't
happens.
expect it.
Yeah, geopolitically, everything's still a disaster. So, I mean, you got to keep it
It's
in,
called a
you got to,
crash.
yeah, yeah. So, and
It's called a
then
crash and not a slide.
yeah, exactly. So we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think it's hard to be too pessimistic, but there's definitely enough cause for the Fed to stop hiking that's caused the market to get excited. But when we're talking about
Absolutely.
when I also do want to can I don't know if you would do this, but um you think we could kind of compare this to Tesla?
As
Like out
far
of all of
as
this, I mean, out of all of this, you know, these companies seem like they're doing awful. Ford, GM, what is the third? Still
Stellantis, yeah,
Stellantis. They own
yeah,
Chrysler then, right?
yeah, they do Ram,
Okay, got it.
those
Yeah.
guys,
So
yeah.
Stellantis. This seems like it's gonna all pretty much crush them. And Tesla, who is still lowering their vehicle prices, they're trying to do that as a methodology to basically take over the market share. Historically, I think it's really weak strategy that doesn't typically work. You pretty much don't want to be trying to do that through prices. You want to do that through uh, just having better vehicles. But if these in a recession, these other manufacturers have to raise prices, and Tesla keeps lowering their prices, and is better for the consumer due to the fact that it's cheaper to drive the electric vehicle and they cost less. I mean, do you see
Mhm.
Tesla actually start to just completely dominate? Even
Yeah, and I was gonna
yeah.
say, taking a step back onto consumer trends, you know, electric vehicles are not selling as well as analysts had reported. Like they are just people don't want electric vehicles, it appears. It comes down to, a discussion we had not long ago on virtue signaling. It's one thing to say, I want to buy an electric vehicle. It's another thing to buy an electric vehicle, especially once you realize the additional costs on fueling that vehicle. Like, I don't remember the exact differential on how much it costs to charge your electric vehicle, but it is significantly higher on a per mile basis than gasoline right now. Like, it's absolutely atrocious and astounding. Like, I feel
Mm,
bad for people that are stuck with these now.
I did not
But
know that. Okay, that's
oh, yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I thought it was cheaper. Like, wait, do you pay when you charge at a? I mean,
When's the last time you looked at your power bill?
well, yeah, wait, I'm kind of feeling like an idiot right now because I don't have an electric vehicle, so I've never even like charged one. I did want to
Yeah,
buy a Cybertruck though.
I
Um,
wanted the what was it, the Hummer EV when I first saw that, it's like, yeah, that's the car I'd get if I got an electric vehicle. And then it's like, well, you're restricted to 400 miles, and if you want to charge that thing, you're looking at 30 minutes at the pump. What is it, a
yeah.
75% charge or something like that? And it's like, the economics just don't make sense for me. Like I was told, this is years ago. So I'm from Houston, Texas. In the state of an emergency, you have a hurricane coming up the Gulf, and you need to get out of the town. If you're in an electric vehicle and that thing stalls out on you on the freeway, you are fucked. Like, you're not making it to Dallas. You are stuck on the freeway. You're walking there.
Yeah.
Like, you are absolutely screwed. You can't just stop at a rest stop at a Bucky's on the way up and, fill up in a couple minutes. You're literally, you know, in a time sensitive situation in a disaster area. There are a lot of risks you're taking on, and it just does not make sense to own one. Sure, it's a cool vehicle. Sure, as far as drivability goes, you're literally sitting on a power bank that doesn't need to combust for you to propel. It's like one of the coolest science based vehicles out there. But at the end of the day, it's just not conventional. You're essentially restricted to your circumference of a town if you were to buy one and drive it. Now, that also raises a good point, and this goes back to Toyota and their ex CEO, who was essentially walked out of the job because he did not support the transition to electric vehicles. He was a big proponent for hybrid plug-in hybrids. And the rationale behind that, and we talked a little bit about this with Doomberg a couple months ago, is that you're not range bound with a plug-in electric. In fact, let's say your average daily drive, it's 20 miles. Typical electric or plug-in hybrids, they have a 40-mile battery range, 30-40 mile battery range before it switches to uh, gasoline. So at the end of the day, you have the benefits of owning an electric vehicle with the benefits of owning a longer range internal combustion engine vehicle, in which you're not emitting carbon through the tailpipe while you drive this for first 40 miles. And if you were to need to evacuate your city, you have that option too.
Yeah.
Plus, the cost, it's significantly less. The resource intensity, it's significantly less than a pure electric vehicle. And it just makes so much more sense. And I think people are starting to realize that. So, it might be the future, at least in the next 10, 20 years, until the technology for electric vehicles, it's not as lousy. Now, going back to your ultimate question, these three major automotive manufacturers, they're at a loss per vehicle, per electric vehicle. Like, they are not making money on producing electric vehicles, especially at the price they're selling them at. And I believe the prices that they selected for sales are based on what Tesla's currently doing, having a more competitive, marketable vehicle for the everyday American. So there are challenges with a lot of the subsidies that are coming down from Washington as far as electric vehicle purchases go, to where I can't remember the price tag required. I think it had to be under like $40,000 or $46,000 or something like that. But once it reaches a certain point and the cost on the consumer, you are no longer eligible for that subsidy, that tax credit, or whatever it comes in as. So, their hand is almost forced to have a lower price for their vehicle sales. Like, it's just not competitive. And it makes me question our government's intentions on, are they really doing this to have an impact on us, or are they doing this to say they're doing something and then place the blame on nothing happening on the corporation themselves? It's like, the IRA or the CHIPS Act. I believe the CHIPS Act, eliminates any share buybacks or dividend distributions, as well as I think the government has to take an equity stake for a grant to be issued through the CHIPS Act. And it's like, no manufacturer in the right mind will become a state-run chip manufacturer. I mean, this isn't China. This is America, the land of the free. They're not going to be
Yeah.
state-run chips manufacturer. That's just, you have to keep in mind that's a security risk. That's a huge security risk. If our government doesn't like Russia one day and cuts off their banking, I mean, that makes you wonder, who else can they cut off? Same as semiconductors. If we decide we don't like Taiwan, or okay, maybe not Taiwan, they have their own infrastructure, but let's say we don't like Ireland anymore, so we cut off their semiconductors, then what? Who else? Who's next? And there goes the entire market for us. So there's unintended consequences involved in these policies. And what I believe it is, it's just virtue signaling. It's showing that, hey, we're doing something. These corporate bigwigs are refusing to do anything, so we're going to blame them, instead of showing the people that we just wrote some shitty policy that nobody's going to buy into because it's absolute garbage. So,
Right.
same with the EVs. We were forcing these manufacturers to sell at lower prices that they can't afford. So we're going to bankrupt them, nationalize them, and now there are it's our industry. So
That
I think it's
is,
all virtue signaling.
yeah, well, it's dumb virtue signaling
Hmm.
from morons. The
For people
hybrid
that
thing is a
read,
really good point.
for people like us that do our homework and actually read the policies, I spent hours looking at the IRA months ago when I was looking at Argon as well as Quanta Services, two EPC firms that are building, power plants, energy transmission oriented infrastructure. I spent a lot of time. I highly recommend going to the Peach Pit, looking up those two articles. Argon, AGX is the ticker, as well as Quanta Services, PWR is the ticker. Both of those are featured. I believe I unlocked them for free access to the entire articles. Highly recommend going through and getting a better idea of the various aspects to the IRA, the CHIPS Act, and the infrastructure bills. But yeah, it's very shallow policy.
I meant to refresh on that. I'm gonna go check those out actually too.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth digging into because you find out how much of this is real, how much of this is, just political talk, and it makes you wonder. I don't know if I know we're going completely off topic from the automotive space,
Yeah,
but
let's actually wrap this. Let's
I want to
actually.
make one more point.
All
I want to
right,
make
all
one more
right.
point on this and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
But my final point is I think it was a week or two ago, Biden passed an order for like $2 billion of power lines to be put in to replace, the older power lines to better support intermittent energy sources like solar and wind. And my problem with this isn't necessarily that he's granting money for these projects, but it's like, isn't that what the IRA and the infrastructure bills are for? Like, why do we need a new bill just for this? Like, that's what these other two bills with these multi-billion-dollar prices on them are for. Like, it just makes you wonder what the hell is going on up there. Like, do they think we're that stupid, or are they just that inefficient with granting money to people that are actually gonna do something impactful instead of a stupid battery recycling plant up in the New England area? Like, it just makes you wonder whose intentions they're considering when these bills are passed and if they're actually going to be effective or just pretty pieces of paper that shows they're trying to do something when all they do is nothing. All right.
Yep.
That was the last point I wanted to make on that. Let's move on to the next topic.
Like political bloat, corporate bloat, and politics. I think there's a different term for that I'm missing, but yeah, it's a mess.
Dipshits.
Yeah. I was trying. I was trying to use political jargon, but
I'm using my Southern charm here.
the Southern charm wins in most cases. Trump proved that. So Southern, well, it's not Southern charm, it's more like
yeah, he's a New Yorker.
Yeah, New York banter, but anything more down to earth. That was my point.
There we go. Down to earth. Keeping it real.
Keeping it real with the auto companies. So, even though they don't shut down all the plants, the unions are very targeted with who they do shut down. They try to shut down what is like the, essential backbones for these companies.
Going to put the most pressure on them.
Yeah, to get them to do these moves. Now, do you think so? It's a 25% increase over the duration of the contracts, which I believe usually are 4 to 5 years. So it's a 25% increase over that period of time to try and keep up with inflation. Do these increases to the workers hinder the amount of and increase benefits to them? And do you hinder? I could. So I'm just asking. I'm pitching this to you because I couldn't prove it definitively. But do you think that this hinders the amount of money that these companies can put into product development in the future? Because I feel like the game right now is going through quite a different revolution. Sure, hybrids are the best right now, but I think eventually that's going to change, and I think that these companies relate to EV, and I see lots of people talking about hydrogen powered vehicles. And I wonder if they're late to that, if it becomes a nail in the coffin, because there's been a lot of interesting prototypes that have not come out with the hydrogen vehicles, and they are already comparable with EV. Now it's not for mass production yet, but it does kind of pique my interest because we often overestimate what we can accomplish in the short term, but underestimate what we can do in the long term. And I think there might be some underestimations going on with hydrogen.
No,
And if
absolutely.
yeah,
And I was going to say, I actually wrote an article highlighting the benefits of hydrogen as a fuel source when I released my article on Finia. It was a spinoff of Borg Warner. They do fuel injection systems for a lot of Class C type trucks, as well as, medium duty trucks, but primarily on the commercial side. And they actually signed a agreement with the Department of Energy, I believe it was this last year, maybe 2022, to execute R&D for hydrogen fuel as a source for semis. And this is something that McKinsey did some research on themselves. And I believe starting in 2027 through I want to say 2035, they're expecting something like 800,000 hydrogen um, fueled Class C trucks to be on the roads. So hydrogen is definitely an interesting source of fuel. And if you look at, so I, you know, to kind of give some more background on myself and my research, a lot of it focuses in the energy transmission space. So when you sift through the peach pit, probably like 85% of it's going to be energy related. But if you look at a lot of these bigger players, right now I'm researching the Chevron and Hess deal for publication this Tuesday. And, they that's a big component to their transition on, being energy producers. How are we going to utilize hydrogen? Can we get the jump on the industry? And how are we going to essentially produce it in a very carbon um, or a less carbon intensive manner? So, looking at the industry transform, hydrogen definitely is becoming a bigger focal point for energy producers. And then going to, people, other industries that have used hydrogen. So, Cleveland Cliffs, one of the biggest steel manufacturers in the United States, they're testing out hydrogen to replace coking coal in their furnaces. So it's one of those things that there's definitely a market for it. We just need to build the infrastructure behind it. And there's a few players out there that are actively doing this. I believe, who was it? Was it Plug Power that was building the hydrogen charging stations for like trucks for truck refueling, I believe.
it's
It,
either plug or fuel
yeah, it was one of those
or
guys.
FCEL or
FCell,
PLUG FCL. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
fuel cell. I think they had a deal with Exxon. I don't. I remember reading about it probably a year or two ago. I think they extended it through 25 or some. It's been a while since I've brushed up on that one, but they had a deal with Exxon a while back. Um, but yeah, I mean the infrastructure is being built out for hydrogen as we speak. So, it very well could be the next fuel source, whether it's for, residential vehicles or commercial vehicles. That's the dividing question. I think it's primarily going to be the focus on Class C trucks just because they're more heavily regulated. Sure, there's plenty of accidents, but it's not going to be as prone to, I guess, nasty combustions as if it were in a residential vehicle, because you're essentially driving what, a hydrogen bomb.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
one nasty stack on the freeway going 100 some miles an hour, that could probably blow up a freeway, right? Well, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe they're more durable than what I would expect, but it's definitely a concern. At least it had been a concern years and years ago. Um, yeah, hydrogen's definitely taking off. It might be that next step
So
instead of electric vehicles.
so back to the original question though, do you think that the the greater demand and constraints that GM, Ford, and I freaking can't get their name right,
Stellantis.
Stellantis are facing are going to draw funds and capital away from their ability to develop their new technology so that they can keep up with the industry that's so competitive, whereas Tesla's profitable, they're doing well. I mean, they're I mean, the market's mad with them, especially with Elon constantly being in the news, but the company's very solid and doing well right now.
No, absolutely. And at the end
Yeah.
of the day, it's going to be skating to where the puck goes. If there's not a lot of demand for electric vehicles, why produce a lot of electric vehicles? If no one's going to be buying them, and if you're at a net loss on producing them, what's the point?
Okay, so do you think the baller move is that Tesla starts producing hybrids? Does that allow them to completely put the other companies out of business? If Elon's like, you know what, screw it, I like to feel that engine. I like to feel the rumble of the car. I want to hear it. And
I want
he
to rev it
says,
underneath the freeway and just blow it up. Yeah.
and he says, and he says, we're gonna make some hybrid vehicles. Do you think he could just crush the market?
For the margin expansion that can have for his production, I think that would be a phenomenal idea, and he would absolutely crush the market. He could essentially produce a vehicle, make it cost competitive with other plug-in hybrids. Plus, he has the name behind the vehicle that, it's Teslas are cool, they're sexy, they have all these awesome features. Go inside one, it's very clean and what's the word I'm looking for? It's just such
Suave,
a clean, huh?
suave,
Suave,
suave. Maybe word
suave.
suave, like he's suave, like
I don't know.
smooth and sexy combination. Yeah,
It's just such a clean look.
yeah.
It's
So for the
cool.
Cybertruck,
The
Cybertruck looks
Cybertruck.
like
Oh yeah,
the
it's like a
Cybertruck looks
tank.
like your video game graphics haven't been finished loading.
That thing is a freaking tank,
I
man.
want one.
Like
I want one. I want one
I
so
kind of do
bad.
too.
I'm
If it
gonna
was a
do it.
plug-in electric or plug-in hybrid, I would so buy one.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna buy one anyways. That's probably what we could get next.
I remember seeing the, go off the grid features where it can double up as kind of like a micro home slash vehicle. And it's like, that is not such a bad idea.
And I
We're
also
going
just
into World War III.
yeah. Well, did you see? You probably didn't see, but I was gonna do a TikTok short about it because I feel like so many people miss so many. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he finally got his redemption for the stone. I think it was a stone. I think it was like a metal ball he had an
Oh yeah, he
actor
threw
throw,
it,
and it broke it. And then they're like,
shattered the
try again, and
glass.
it broke it again. Probably one of the most embarrassing moments. Well, Joe Rogan said, "Why don't I shoot your Cybertruck with my bow?" Because Elon drives a Cybertruck around, and
Oh really?
they're finally gonna get some out. And Elon's like, "Yeah, go ahead, shoot it with your bow. I bet you it won't go through." And Joe was like, "Oh yeah, well, it definitely will." And I mean, that arrow hit that thing, destroyed the broadhead on the bow, completely flattened it. Only had a small dent in the door. You saw the sparks fly out of the on the contact with the door, and I was like, "Whoa!" And so Tesla, Elon also said that later this month or next month they're going to release a bunch of advertising clips of them unloading Tommy guns and everything into the Cybertrucks, and I was like, that is freaking awesome. And that,
You are
I'm not gonna
driving a
lie,
tank.
yeah, I know, and I really want to buy like what the only legal tank that you can buy here in the US. As far as I know in Britain you can get away with like actually buying a tank and driving it around. But
You can build a killdozer and drive that
yeah.
around.
Yeah. But in the US, I'll have to settle for a Cybertruck, the ultimate apocalyptic. Well, I guess not. You just proved the hurricane thing is an issue, but whatever. I'm still gonna do it.
You don't got to worry about those in the Midwest, just a couple tornadoes here and there, and
And
you'll
I
be
think that,
fine.
yeah. Cybertruck, if that thing could take bullets, wrecking in it's got to be. Actually, I wonder if that's the next like issues of people wrecking their Cybertrucks into people and just completely going straight through other vehicles.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, can you imagine like because I don't know about you. I've seen again from Houston, I've seen a number of vehicles just pillaged through like buildings or like signage or whatever. And it's like, dude, if you're driving a Cybertruck, driving through a Starbucks, like that thing, you're gonna go in one wall and out the other clean.
Yeah, you
That
really
might be
are
a safety
though.
concern.
It really might be. I just not thought about that. I wonder if there are gonna be regulations against those things. That makes me
They are
want
gonna
one
need some
even
liability
more.
insurance.
You're gonna see a bunch of Trump voters outside. They're not taking my Cybertruck.
All right, we're shorting the insurance companies once the
Yeah,
Cybertrucks come out.
yeah,
Go long on automotive insurance, go short on what is it, commercial real estate
yeah,
insurance. There we
yeah.
go.
All right. Well, that seems like a good place to end this week's special report. Uh
So the
Bearish.
ultimate goal, bearish, or I'll let you finish up, wrap it up.
No, 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 go for it.
Oh, yeah, okay. Ultimate overarching theme, short American Axle through the end of the year. Potential big implications from the UAW strike, given the lack of their aftermarkets business. Potential decline in stock price is around 30%. This is not investment advice. This is my own trade rationale, and your participation is your own risk.
Yep. And as my sign declares, I may be wrong, but I doubt it. Have a good one, folks.